So, Happy New Year and welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. Sometimes, especially in the winter months, we need a book that is filled with sunshine and sparkle and makes us feel a little bit warm inside, maybe gives us some hope. What's even better is when that book has something to say. And this particular book, Kaya of the Ocean, is filled with so many messages that I can't wait to unpack about anxiety and friendships and living up to family expectations and finding your own voice. And we are so fortunate to celebrate the publication of Kaya of the Ocean with its author, Gloria Wan. So, welcome to the show, Gloria. I am so excited to talk about all of your adventures in learning today.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, this is your first novel, is that correct?
It is. And I'm really excited to have it. I feel like I hear this expression where people say it's the book of my heart, and that's kind of how I feel about this book. So I'm glad it's the first one out there.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the book of your heart, because there were so many amazing themes to unpack within it. Can you give a brief synopsis and then talk a little bit about what led you to write this particular book?
For sure. So it is a contemporary middle grade novel, and it's focuses on a young girl named Kaya who is growing up in Hawaii, and she's Chinese American. And she struggles with anxiety and a fear of the water, which she can't really seem to explain to herself. And it obviously makes life difficult being in Hawaii, being surrounded by water. But she eventually realizes that she is descended secretly from the Chinese goddess Mazu, who's the Chinese water goddess, and her discovery of that and her having to learn how to control these powers and her struggles with anxiety kind of dovetail throughout the novel. So yeah, it brings in Chinese mythological fantasy. It has friendship and family and the struggle with anxiety and just learning to kind of accept who you are and everything that you are.
Wonderful. And what prompted you to write this particular book?
So that's a really good question. I would say there was a couple things, but the main driving force was that I started writing it kind of when the world was just emerging from the pandemic, but there were still a lot of um, long-term effects of it that I could see. And one specific effect was in some children very close to me. I could see them struggling with anxiety for the first time. And that was really hard to see, especially because I struggled with anxiety as a child, and I still do now to a certain extent. And I could remember how terrifying it is, especially the first time when you're a child and it's new and you don't know what's happening and you're just so afraid that something is deeply wrong with you. So I wanted to write this book almost as a message to those kids and maybe to my like former self that that all parts of you, even the parts that you might not love as much or you might see as a weakness, are important parts of making up the beautiful, complex, amazing person you are, and kind of learning to accept all those parts of yourself is like the true superpower. So that was the inspiration.
Well, and I felt like you captured that beautifully.
Thank you so much.
Anxiety really, I think you hit it. I was thinking about it, and it feels like there are a lot more middle grade novels that are touching on anxiety today than even 10 years ago. And generally, authors reflect what's going on in the world around us. And I've been sort of thinking, what was it that led to this uptick? And I think you've got it. I do think it's coming out of the pandemic. I mean, I think anxiety's always been with us. We didn't necessarily have the names for it. My own daughter, who's 25, struggled with anxiety, but we didn't necessarily have the tools and the things that, and I found myself identifying with Kaya as I was reading it, going, oh, I so hope my daughter didn't feel like this
Right.
as she
And
was growing up.
no, exactly. And I think you make such a good point that there is more out there talking about anxiety, and I think that that's a really powerful thing too. Because one thing that I try to address in Kaya is for a lot of the book, especially at the beginning, she's like trying to hide it because she's afraid and she's embarrassed, and she scratches herself, which is something that I did, and she really doesn't want people to know. She doesn't want her friends to know. She kind of tries to tell her parents, but her parents are don't know how to handle it at first, and so it goes it all goes inside. And I'm a big believer that I think that that makes things harder. That if you talk about things and bring it into the light and normalize it, it's can only be good. So I think you're exactly right. There is more out there, and I'm so glad that there it's in
And
the
I love the
conversation.
fact, and this is a no spoilers thing, but I do love the fact that Kaya works through her anxiety without her superpowers being the reason that she's able to get the help that she needs. Like, I think that makes it really relatable for your 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old reader who may not have the superpowers of being descended from the water goddess.
Right.
And I thought that was really powerful that you gave her those powers, but at the same time, it wasn't the powers that freed her, and she wasn't freed from anxiety, but that lessened it and made it easier.
Thank you so much for saying that. I'm so glad you noticed that. That was really important to me that I wanted to have like a connection between kind of this discovery of these powers she couldn't control and her struggles, kind of accepting this part of her, this anxiety. But you're right, I absolutely didn't want it to be. And then it was cured, and she was all fine because A, it doesn't life doesn't work that way. But B, you're right. You know, most people are not descended from goddesses, and I wanted it to be kind of a side discovery in that though it's something that will continue in the future, kind of a discovery she makes about herself in one way about her powers, but another discovery about herself and her accepting herself.
I think that's really important. You know, I was reading something about some of the other short stories that you've written, and you had said a quote that really resonated with me about how water seems to find its way into being a main character or a side character in the things you write. I'd love to unpack that a little bit. Tell us more about your fascination with water and why water plays the role it plays in this book.
Oh, I love that question and I love the observation because it's so true. I with honestly without even realizing it, water comes up in most of my stories as a almost as a character. And I think it's because I was giving this some thought the other day, and I think it's because water and especially the ocean, there's so much mystery to it and so much power and so much unknown, but it's also a source of soothing and calm for so many people. So Kaya was actually the idea for it actually came to me when I was actually on a beach and it was nighttime and I was staring out at the ocean and you could barely see it kind of under the moonlight and it was rolling in, but I was just so in awe of all this like power and unknown, but also the fact that it was like always there and always kind of steady and constant. And so there is so much that I want to bring to that. But when I was standing there and I was thinking kind of like about the ocean and water, and then I remembered Mazu, and then I thought about these struggles and anxiety, and it all came together that way. But I, you're right. The ocean, I think the ocean is beautiful, and I think it's such a great metaphor. So it always works its way in somehow.
And Mazu, did you grow up knowing about Mazu, the water goddess, or did you have to do research?
A little of both. So, I did hear about Mazu, first heard about Mazu from my dad, who kind of like, I don't remember how it first came about, but I do remember him telling me about the story and about the legend, and about the fact that she was very much still kind of revered, especially in a lot of coastal towns. At the time, I think I was asking about her name and whether she's named, other people are name their kids after her. And he was like, no, they would never do that. That would be disrespectful. And I think that worked its way into one of the versions of Kaya when I was writing it. But then so basically Mazu is this amazing, interesting, unique, strong figure that I think exists in a space that it's not super common for like these strong female figures to exist. So I was already very intrigued by her. And then I I delved into the history a little bit, especially while I started writing. And honestly, I'm not making this up. A lot of the things that I found about Mazu's like kind of origins, um, I found out after I wrote Kaya, but they fit so perfectly. Like she had two sidekicks that initially like, fought with, and then they became her best friends. And she was a voracious reader when she was a child and couldn't swim right away, but learned to swim later. And all that stuff actually like ended up dovetailing really well with the story I was writing. And then of course, once I read it, I kind of tried to make the parallels more clear. But I really wanted to bring this powerful Chinese water goddess into modern times, into like this fictionalized account of what would it be like if someone was descended from her but was struggling with something like anxiety in the modern age. So
Well, and I
that was
love the way
exciting.
you were able to sort of connect history throughout as well, because there are these really interesting little vignettes that take you across the ages from the 1600s to the present and sort of form that connection to Kaya.
Yeah, I those were really really enjoyable to write. One of them, I think there were three flashbacks. One of them actually has a very fictionalized account taken from kind of part of my family history. So that was kind of a way for me to like work in my cultural background and my family background into it. And then the other ones, I think I did some research for and wanted to write a fictionalized account of it. But one of the flashbacks I think was really, it was actually much longer, and then I ended up having to whittle it down because it was taking too much attention away from the plot. But the story of Yujin, who is her ancestor in her goddess lineage, who dresses up as her own brother and steals away from China to San Francisco to work in the gold rush to make money for her family. There was so much kind of like rich story behind it, and it was really fun to just like dip into it for a little bit.
Well, it almost sounds like Eugen could command her own story.
Yes, yes, for sure. I definitely had to hold myself back from like doing too much in that flashback.
Well, and the other thing I think that you did so well, and if teachers or parents are listening and thinking about books they want to, or librarians that they want to put in front of kids, you really capture the relationships, the friend relationships, the insecurities, the jealousies, but also the I've got your back no matter what. And that's hard to do. Where was your inspiration for these 13, 14, 15-year olds?
That's a really good question. So I think when I was writing it, I really wanted to make sure that Kaya had these strong friendships, that would be strained at some point, but that kind of would carry her through. And I think part of it was that I know that at that age, it's like an incredible age. There's so much excitement and so much change, but also things that are scary, such as, encountering anxiety for the first time. But it's also a time where I think kids are starting to turn a little more to friends as sources of comfort and sources of information and away from their family, which is, before it was all about the parents. Now it's a lot about the friends. And I wanted to give Kaya the kind of strong friendships that I think could really support her. And so her friendships with Ailana and Naomi, I see at this point in her life as almost like they are kind of the loves of her life. And it's funny because in the earlier versions of Kaya, she has the friendship with the boy Tayo. And in the early versions, it was much more crush based. And I actually pulled back from that because when in the couple of iterations I went through, I was like, I don't want this to take away from like the true relationship that I see really mattering to Kai right now, which is her friendships with her best friend. So I wanted to have that there. I wanted to show its weaknesses, show its strengths, but it's part of what kind of gives Kaya support and helps her eventually learn to kind of deal with her anxiety differently.
And I think that with Tayo, you sort of left it open for what might happen down the road or might not happen, because again, at that age, who knows?
Exactly, exactly. It's more like I reduced it to hopefully more like the promise of love or the potential for future love rather than anything, too
Yeah.
crush based.
Well, and it felt more like these were two lifelong friends who, yeah, there was the potential for something, but this wasn't the time.
Exactly, exactly. She had a lot going on.
She had a lot going on that Christmas. So Hawaii, what inspired you to use Hawaii as the setting?
Yeah, that's so a couple of things I would say, like you, I love Hawaii. I'm a big fan of it. It's a beautiful place, kind of topographically, geographically. It's just got natural beauty, but also the people are so warm there, and it's a little bit of my happy place. Like a lot of Kaya was actually written there. I drew so much inspiration from it, and I kind of wanted to honor it and thank it by having it be the setting. Um, but I also thought it would be a good place to set this story where there's a girl who's got this anxiety and this fear of the water to have her surrounded by water. I thought that was like um, exactly kind of the setting she needed to be in to kind of address all of these things, especially when it turns out that she's descended from a water goddess. So,
So before we go to a break, I'm wondering,
mhm.
would you like to read an excerpt from Kaya?
Oh, that would be great. I have some copies here I can try
All
and
right.
find.
I'll pause it while you find it and then we'll come back. So before we go to break, I was thinking it would be really fun for the audience to get to hear a little bit of Kaya in your words. Would you mind reading an excerpt?
No, I'd be happy to. So this is actually a scene where Kaya gets into an argument with her cousin Anne, who's visiting, and they've kind of had some trouble already, and they've had some friction, but it kind of all comes to a head at the side of the water. And she's been trying to hide her powers, which aren't always under her control, and her friends are there, and there's a lot of jealousy and a lot of resentment, and so that's the setup for the scene. Anne sighed noisily. I don't know why you're both so scared of her. You don't need to act all sorry. She's the one being weird. I whirled around and advanced on Anne again. I could feel my anger boiling over, erupting like a volcano. Why did you even come here? Go back home to Manhattan where everything's so much cooler. I spun on my heel to storm away before Anne could respond. Naomi and Iolana chased after me. We had only gone 20 feet or so from the water when alarmed yells and cries startled us from our exodus. I looked over to see Tayo and his friends waving and gesturing wildly at the water. Spinning around, I was horrified to see a giant wave, far larger than any of the medium-sized waves I'd seen so far, crash over Anne and swallow her up. For a moment, I stood paralyzed in disbelief. The water receded, leaving nothing but glistening sand behind. It felt almost like a nature-based magic show. First you see her, now you don't.
Wow, that's a good section. And seriously, folks, you have got to go out and get this book. It is going to absolutely warm your winter. When we come back, we're going to learn a little bit more about Gloria and her adventures in learning. So we'll take a break and we'll come right
Okay,
back. All right.
awesome.
So, welcome back to the Adventures in Learning podcast. Gloria, I always love to ask people about their own adventures in learning. How did you get to the point where you're writing middle grade novels? So, sort of what led up to that?
Yeah, I would say that I am one of those people, and I'm always a little hesitant to say it because I'm like, is it obnoxious? But I'm one of those people who loved writing ever since they were a child. I remember I would write all the time. I would write stories and even books, quote unquote. And I would want to be a writer. That was always my kind of goal. I also loved reading, and I definitely feel like a lot of my most memorable moments with books at the beginning, obviously I'm sure there were board books in the early ones, but were middle grade novels. So that always had a really special place in my heart. I studied English literature and sorry, can I say that again?
Of course.
Um, Thanks. I studied English literature at college and I took a lot of writing courses there. And then I kind of focused on writing literary fiction short stories for a while and having those published in literary magazines. And that was a really great experience, a really great kind of introduction to the publishing world in a different form. And then a couple years ago, I started writing novels, especially kidlit novels. And then that's when I reached out, queried for an agent, a lot of querying, and I landed my first agent. And we actually went out with a young adult novel, which wasn't picked up. And she and I parted amicably. And then I found my current agents, and they are amazing, Laura Cameron and Amanda Roscoe from Transatlantic. And they're brilliant, and they were the ones who helped me sell Kaya. So that was my journey to this point. But I am so honored and happy to be writing in middle grade genre since it was the genre I first fell in love with when I was a kid.
And I think I saw that, like all of us, you've done all kinds of different jobs en route to becoming a writer. What have been some of the most interesting things you've done?
It's a good point. I've done, I guess it's funny because everything I've done has been writing based, though not always fiction writing based. So I did practice as a lawyer previously, so obviously a lot of specific writing in that. And then I was in, you know, kind of legal tech and also doing a lot of writing in kind of the product marketing world. So I really, for me, it was always whatever I did, my favorite part of it was always writing, whether it was fiction or nonfiction. It's just like the love of words and constructing, anything to communicate was always something I enjoyed.
Did you save any of those early books that you wrote when you were a kid?
I did not, and I vastly between being sad about that and sometimes thinking about how dramatic I was as a kid and then being relieved because I think that I'm sure there was a lot of dramatic paths before I found a voice that worked.
And do you remember what books inspired you when you were younger?
I do. I do. I would say there were three books that even now I like will recommend to people and I really loved. One was called The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle.
Remember
And
that one?
yeah, it was amazing. I think it was groundbreaking because I don't think there were a lot of books in the middle grade sphere with like a female character who was going on adventure on the high seas. So it was like mind opening to me in a lot of ways. um, Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, which is, I just remember being so blown away at the way she kind of talked about immortality and mortality and existentialism and things that kids don't usually think about in those high terms. But obviously, kids are thinking about, what it means to be alive and what it means to be, breathing and that sort of thing. But
Sure.
she did it in she treated it in such a accessible way. I thought it was really powerful. And then there's another book called Homecoming by Cynthia Voigt. And it was, I guess it wasn't adventure so much as like a survival of these four kids who are abandoned and have to find their way to safety. But all those books really, they stuck with me even now.
And are there authors today that inspire you or that you kind of look and think, that's who I want to be?
For sure. I would say there's two authors in the adult sphere that I just love the way their voices work, and it's Humphrey Lahiri and David Mitchell. And obviously, they're writing very different stories than I'm writing, but the way that they construct sentences and their prose is just beautiful. In the middle grade sphere, there's a writer and in particular a book that I think I read a few years ago. It's called When You Trap a Tiger by Tay Keller.
I have
And
that sitting beside your book on the bookshelf
oh,
because I thought about the two of them in the same sphere.
I love that. I love that because I love her voice in general. And then that book just, I thought it was so powerful. She handled a very difficult topic so sensitively, but so meaningfully that I remember just being blown away. And it was like, it was one of those books where I could feel myself like, I feel emotional, but I don't usually cry. And then that book, I was like fighting back tears because it was just so well done.
It really was. And I've been teaching with that book. I teach a children's lit course for librarians and
Oh,
reading
excellent.
specialists. And so we've been using that book when we talk about powerful literature that sort of crosses those boundaries between fantasy and realism.
Right, right. It's a great book. I
But I
think it's
love
a
the
great
fact you
recommendation.
brought that one up because honestly, that was the first thing that came to mind when I read Kaya. As I thought, this belongs on the shelf together.
Oh, that is such a
Could
compliment
use
to
them
me.
together as a teacher. So I'm so glad
I
you said that.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. That means so much to me. That's a huge compliment.
So, what are you working on right now? Are you able to share?
Um, I think I can share more generally. I'm working on a couple of middle grade novels. Actually, there's hopefully I'll be able to share some news about one of them soon. It's not quite at the stage of sharing yet, but I've gotten some exciting news about that. And I'm always working on the short stories as well. I'm one of those people who like is only happy if I have a lot of projects kind of in the wings and in the pipeline.
That makes total sense. Do you have any advice for a young person who might want to be a writer like you when they grow up?
I do, I do. I would say that the main advice I could give is to just keep going because I think that writing in general, especially when you start writing, long books, it can be daunting and there can be a lot of moments of kind of like you might feel discouraged or defeated. It's they're so long and there's so many plot lines to keep track of and so many characters. And then you might hit writer's block, and those are really tough. But I found that if you force yourself to keep going, and I feel like it's difficult because I think writers tend to be perfectionists. They don't even want to put down one word that's not the perfect word. But if you keep going and write through that and just remind yourself that you can always come back and revise it later and, change it later, sometimes you can almost write a bridge to the next section. And then when you come back, you can make, the stream of consciousness that you created into something powerful. But yeah, just keep going in writing. And also, when they get to the point of wanting to actually enter the publishing world, also keep going. Because I think publishing is it can be a daunting area. There's a lot of gatekeeping and inevitable rejection. But just remember that that your voice deserves to be heard, and there's someone out there who it will reach. And when you make that connection, it's so amazing.
That's great advice. And so, the last question, since we're at the start of the new year and we're celebrating the birth of your book, what's currently bringing you joy or what's bringing you hope?
That I love that question. That I've actually been thinking about it a lot in general. I feel like people do towards the end of the year. I would say in terms of what's bringing me joy, in addition to reading or writing, is spending time with my family, just taking some time to enjoy people around me. Outside of what's happening right now, as I said, I love being on beaches. I love traveling. I love eating. I always feel funny saying that, but food is like a huge
Food is
passion of mine.
awesome.
Food is awesome. Um, but in terms of what's bringing me hope, I think that anytime I read or hear about children who are doing something to change the world or better the world, it gives me so much hope. Like I think during the pandemic, there was a good news network, and that was great because they
Yes.
really highlighted things like that. Like, and when I hear about like kids who are trying to come up with inventions to fight climate change, or my daughter and her friends at one point put on several bake sales to benefit kids who are suffering from poverty or war in like Ukraine, Syria, Turkey. Or I actually was watching one of your podcasts where you were talking with Catherine Applegate, who's author of the Ivan series, which I
Yes. I love
love.
her and I love that series.
She's amazing. She and her books are amazing. And she said something where she was like, it was actually the kids who fought and told their parents that the gorilla that Ivan was based on shouldn't be imprisoned, that he should be free. And I actually didn't know that. And it gave me so much hope. Those kind of stories give me hope that like that there's all these kids who want to change the world.
I agree. So, last question. You mentioned you have a daughter. Has she read Kaya?
She did. She did. She's been so great. She was actually the perfect age to be a beta reader for Kaya. So she actually provided a lot of input. She's been very invested in the journey. She's been so proud, as I'm so proud of her. And you'll actually see her in like the dedication acknowledgments, which I think she was really excited about.
Well, and our daughters can be our toughest critics. So, if she gave you two thumbs up, what are you all waiting for? Go get the book.
Right. That was the critic's thumbs up I needed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gloria, for joining us on the Adventures in Learning podcast. It has been
Thank
so great
you.
to have you, and I will drop links so people can order your book.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I appreciate it.